Hi there, I'm Tom Spencer. This week on Central Texas Gardener, esteemed author and drought plant expert Mary Irish puts us on the right track with her guide to success in the Lone Star State. On tour, see how a Minnesota gardener found new roots when she moved to Hill Country Rock. Daphne answers your top question and makes her pick of the week, and John has your backyard basic tip. So let's get growing right here, right now.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.
What's it like when you're an expert gardener in Minnesota and then you move to Texas? Well, see how Kathleen Lorsbach planted herself quite firmly on new ground.
Kathleen Lorsbach picked up a new botanical vocabulary when she and husband Tom moved to Texas in 2007. Agaves were a first for her, since her gardening knowledge was rooted in Minnesota.
Both my grandmothers were avid gardeners, and as a little girl I was always helping them in the garden, and I just had such great memories of that. And then when I got my first house, I just started with gardening my own things with transplants and pieces from their gardens, and it just became a real hobby that I spent a lot of time on.
When she landed in Texas, Kathleen adapted her skills with enthusiasm for plants she'd never grown.
And I fell in love with the succulents, the agave and the cactus and all those things, and the rock formations. So when we built this house, there was just nothing here. You know, it was just a builder's lot with a few plants in the front. And so I took that opportunity to kind of start over and make it more of a Texas kind of a landscape.
Not every plant is native, but Kathleen chose the ones that can take the heat.
If things don't survive 1 year, they're gone. You know, I just don't try to baby them at all.
She defined each area with structural standouts and diversified textures.
But the color was key too, because that silvery blue color, the agaves started that, and then the rosemary with the blooms on those, and then the Texas silverado sage, and then the Arizona cypress along the backside too. It's all that blue-green color. I sort of get into, I like a certain kind of a color and effect, and I kind of go overboard with it and just keep using, but maybe that helps with the symmetry a little bit.
While some gardeners curse their rocks, Kathleen treasures each one.
Well, I was just amazed that they were, you know, here. And then, like in the back, when we wanted to do some landscaping and build the pool, they sort of uncovered natural rock shelves where the rocks were protruding out of the ground, and that was just like an epiphany. I thought, this is fabulous, these rocks. I've got to make sure every single one of them that I can show. So they actually designed the pool to run along the rock ledge so that we didn't interfere with the rock ledge. And then there's an arm of rocks right jutting into what would normally be plain lawn. But again, I had them cut around the rocks so that we can see the rocks. And they're so neat too, because all the little fossilized holes, and you know that this whole area was underwater, you know, millions or hundreds of thousands of years ago. So it's interesting to see those things and know that all of this at one time was completely underwater, and that's kind of fun to remind ourselves of too when you see those rocks.
Native stones frame raised beds for cascading lantanas that attract nectaring wildlife. Knockout roses aren't native, but they perform like ones, flowering for months.
But they're so easy care, and they give some nice color, and they don't need to be sprayed. That's another one of my rules. I really don't want to deal with pesticides and herbicides and all of that. If the bugs get it to the point where they die, then that's the end of them. Back in Minnesota, you had to do what they call the Minnesota tip method. You had to actually dig the roses half up, tip them over, and mound the dirt over them, or they wouldn't make it through the winter. And you planted the bud union a good 4 or 5 inches below the soil level. And of course here you don't have to do any of that.
One plant from her Minnesota days has worked just fine.
One thing I was surprised at, some things do make it here that were in Minnesota, like the mums. I can't believe how well these mums do here and survive in the heat and lack of water. And they're real troopers, and that's a shocker. With the aphids and so forth on, I think it's a salvia, the blue ones this year, they got the aphids really badly. And I was spraying them down with water a lot, and then I just kind of gave up and thought, let's see what happens. And they were fine. You know, they made it through the season, so it didn't kill the plant. So I've learned that too. Some things just cycle through and the plants are okay.
Beyond the kitchen doors, she designed a Spanish courtyard as a dining room with views to the back and front gardens. A pergola supports a young native crossvine that soon will cover it with almost evergreen shade. Here, Kathleen, Tom, and her mom, Pat, relax after the day's work is done. Fragrant elfin thyme thrives in the gritty, rocky spot. Raised beds frame their dining room with subtle privacy. In front, she designed raised beds again to reduce the stiff Bermuda lawn with structural plants and friends for wildlife. Sadly, when she thought she was getting good soil, it turned out to be the dense red death type of sandy loam.
Now, when like an agave rots out because there's too much water, or I want to plant cactus, now what I'm going to do is plant it in decomposed granite or sand mixture. I'm going to do a little, when I replant things, I'm going to take that opportunity to dig down and expand the area a little bit and put better dirt in there for this specific plant that's going to live there.
Although she traded months of snow for months of brutal heat, Kathleen's already a confirmed Texan.
I like Texas, you know, and I think there's something that infuses, you know, the gardening and the architecture and all of it just sort of works together to be an environment for some reason that I just feel naturally attracted to. I just feel really at home here. And I like the plants, and I like the place, and I like the people.
Thanks so much for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be welcoming back to Central Texas Garden an old friend, Mary Irish. Welcome back to the program.
Well, it's my pleasure. Well, thank you for having me again.
One of our favorite authors and an intrepid Austin native who's
Absolutely.
ventured out to the desert Southwest and back again.
That's right. That's right. Came back to South Texas.
Well,
That's right.
Mary, for those who don't know her work, is a prolific author, and she used to be the director of the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix, Arizona.
I was the director of public horticulture.
Ah,
the
okay.
real directors would be shocked to hear you say that.
Okay, well, in Arizona, and is now working at the San Antonio Botanical Garden. You have published a slew of books recently, one of which is kind of like a beginner's guide for Texas gardening,
That's
which is our
right.
big focus. But you also recently published a memoir about your experiences as a gardener.
I did. We lived in our garden in Arizona for 20 years, and I wrote what I call the story of that garden.
Okay.
You know, and how all the different pieces and parts came together and interacted over the years. And you know what a long-term garden is like.
Absolutely.
They start out one way, they move another, and then they go here, and then they go there. And in the end, you have a lot of great stories. And that's what it is.
Well, that's great. And every garden has a story, right?
Oh, yes. Or many.
Right. And the toughest stories we hear often are from beginning gardeners.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's the
Especially-
newest book.
Right,
really,
and
yeah.
for people who've moved to this region from other parts that may be, let's say, a little more gentle.
Yes, and really this is not as rough as where I came from, to be quite honest, but it's
Right.
quite different than, say, the Midwest.
Right,
Or the
right.
Northeast or someplace like that, or even the Deep South in one
Sure,
way.
sure. And, you know, despite the fact that we've had some beautiful rain this fall, much needed, desperately needed, really, rain in the region, we are stuck in the middle of a historic drought still.
Correct. That's right, and it's evident. It's particularly evident in nature. I mean, when you look around, you drive in the hills, or you drive around, get out of the city or something, you really start seeing the effects of it. You start seeing dead trees, hillsides that are half done. Anyone who's lived here for a long time recognizes that some years the wildflowers aren't quite what you thought they could be or had seen in the past. I mean, you can see it really clearly when you go outside of town. But even in your garden, you really notice.
Right.
I mean, absolutely.
Well, and you know, what's happening in Mother Nature is impacting us whether we want it to or not.
Correct.
Watering restrictions
Absolutely.
and just the necessity of being smarter with our resources
Oh, yeah.
is calling us to a different way to garden. And so that really is kind of the undercurrent or theme of the book in many ways.
It is for me. And when I took this book on, I sort of told the publisher that this is they know me, and this is my background, this is my interest, and I think this would be useful. That these are hopefully plants within the regions that are most successful. They're plants that take minimal intervention watering, can generally grow with the conditions that are there, and really you only need to, get them well established. And it's not like you can turn them completely loose, but most of them you can. Actually, especially the woody plants, woody plants.
So it's really a matter of picking the right site for the plants.
So. Yes.
Though there are ways you can modify the site, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can pay attention to things like exposure. The more sun, especially if it's not really well adapted to the sun, the more water, if you aren't careful. In addition to mulch, I'm a massive fan of mulch. Mulch makes a huge difference in how much soil moisture is lost just to evaporation to the air instead of staying down there where it is for the plants. And something that I brought from Arizona, and that is you water long and deep at long intervals. And that pays off in no matter what you're growing, where you're growing.
Exactly.
It's way better than any kind of little piddling water daily sort of thing,
I don't know if this is true in Arizona, but in Texas, living right along the edge of the escarpment, which millions of people do in both San Antonio, Austin, and parts north, if you head west, you have one soil type, which is a quick draining caliche mixed with a little bit of clay.
Pretty much rock.
And limestone. And then you go east and you have deep, gunky clay.
Those old deep prairie soils. That's right. And those are radically different situations. I mean, you're absolutely right. And there are plants that love each one. And some plants will take either, but I would pay attention to, particularly in the clay, to be honest, because the drainage is so difficult often there that it can kill plants that are very well adapted to the rock and to high drainage, and that really need a kind of a fast draining situation. There are a lot of things you can do to help it. You can mitigate it, but those soils dump truckloads of gravel help. Raised beds, or even just raising the ground a bit. Quantities and quantities of gravel is absolutely helpful.
You're talking to somebody who brought in probably about 30 dump truckloads of crushed granite over time.
I'm telling you, yeah, exactly. You either fill the pit with granite or you pull it up on the top. But that's the biggest challenge in those soils, is that they are very, very poor, and they also stay cold longer. They stay cold, and that can be a real problem with some plants.
Well, and speaking of which, I mean, there are a lot of your favorite plants and mine are woody lilies, things like the agaves and the yuccas and things like that. All those beautiful, beautiful plants, which are better adapted to the West and to the thinner soils. We get a monsoon like we've had this fall, and you can lose those, right?
You certainly can. They can be sort of overwhelmed, as it were. What they do best is get plenty of water, and it's a fairly long period of time in between. They do not have root systems that allow them to kind of go on and off. If the water's there, they take it up, and they don't know how to quit, and they don't do it well. And so they can be swamped and really taken to the cleaners, as it were. You can lose them in too much rain too fast with poor. So those are excellent choices to put either in a raised bed, containers even, or raise up the soil. This is where your 30 tons of gravel really, really helps. Something like a berm. I've even seen them done the other way around, where the hole is filled with gravel in effect, and then they're put on top of it. I think raising it is a little better. They don't have very deep root systems, as you know. They're very shallow, more wide than deep. And so the berm is a really good idea. Don't put them like under the eave or the place where the little pond always happens at your house, or any of those little things. But you can still, especially vulnerable when it's cold, and that happens. They're not growing. They're really not sort of able to overcome it.
They can't shed the moisture.
They can't shed it. They're not metabolizing much, and so you really can. You need to take some attention if you're in a really rainy area.
Okay. Well, the book is filled with great plants, with an introductory information about them. Let's walk people through some of the picks for both East and West in our region. Let's start with the West. What are some of your favorites there? We have A couple of things that are on our list here, scarlet buckeye, and that.
Oh yeah, Aeschylus. Yeah, that's actually a local native around San Antonio and west, a little bit here and in the hill country.
Usually around creek beds, right?
It actually is, but in nature that's where you find it. But it does a very good job ornamentally, and it is an unusual, big, nice, woody, small tree that likes either the full sun or the shade. And so that's kind of a nice combination.
Great flowers.
Great flowers, ranging from either absolutely scarlet red through orange and even yellow colored forms. And when you have all those together, there's no telling what you'll get. You get bicolors, you get all kinds of stuff. It's just a charm. It has a big, beautiful, pretty leaf. You know, it's a handsome, handsome plant.
Yeah.
It could probably fit in to gardens of many different styles, you know, with a lot of different looks.
I think in
actually.
formal woodlands kind of
Very,
settings.
very good there. I think actually even something more formal if you want, because those big leaves are just really crisp and lovely. They really are.
Well, that's scarlet buckeye. Narrow-leaf rosewood is another
very
one.
western.
Yes.
Chisos Mountains, Chihuahuan desert plant.
Right.
Again, a very large woody shrub. But, you know, in South Texas, all the way up to here, it has a lot of cold tolerance. And it can grow here on absolute natural rainfall. It almost did that in Phoenix, Arizona. So you can imagine. It's a very heat, drought tolerant. This is a big evergreen shrub that's wonderful for screening if you need to hide something. And it has big heads of white flowers in the spring. And it's got these nice, long, dark green leaves that are luscious on there.
Really
They're
dark
thick.
color.
You know,
It's a nice color.
It's a beautiful color, and it's a pretty form. And it's thick, you know, so you can really use it that way.
Another plant we wanted to highlight is the Texas persimmon, which I have to admit,
absolutely adore it.
You and me both. This is one of my all-time favorites.
It is one of my all-time favorites. It really is, and this is one of the spectacular plants of for Texas. This one has a great deal of cold tolerance. It goes all the way to Dallas with effortlessly, really. But this is the great analog to crepe myrtle for me. I mean, much less water, much more tolerance to heat, much less problems with all kinds of different mildews and bugs and all kinds of things. It isn't as showy. It doesn't have the flowers, but it has that spectacular bark. You know, it's got that same
beautiful Japanese architecture.
Gorgeous architectural bark. And again, a plant that could fit into a big native garden, a woodland garden, or a very formal oriental styled garden very easily.
And there's so many other plants that we could pull out, but I just want to again commend you on an excellent book.
Thank you.
The plant lists are great, and this is really a book for those folks who are just hankering to get started.
That's right. It is a beginner's book. It really is. And this is the way to jump into it and jump off.
But what I appreciate is you've picked a lot of plants that are interesting and fun to play with, as opposed to the boring yada 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 plants.
Oh well, yeah. You know, I'm not a boring yada yada plant kind of gal.
Anyway, well, Mary, always a pleasure visiting with you. Thank you so much for your continued excellent work and getting good word out there about so many important aspects of our gardening, including a lot of our mutual favorite plants,
yes,
I think.
Exactly.
So great to have you on the program.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and coming up next is our friend Daphne.
Hi, I'm Daphne Richards, and this is Augie. Our plant this week is creeping germander, and various species in the genus Teucrium all do great in Central Texas gardeners. With flowers from pale pink to light lavender and striking gray foliage, this lovely little mounding plant will surprise you with its cheeriness. It's very drought tolerant, making it the perfect plant to add to your garden if you're trying to be more water conscious. But perhaps even better, it tolerates soggy conditions much better than many other low water use species. And as we all recently learned, it does still rain occasionally, and sometimes in copious amounts. So creeping germander won't rot at the first sign of a cloudy day. Plant Teucrium in full sun for best floral display. But if you have a shady spot, it'll be okay there too. Most species mound to about 6 to 10 inches, but spread much further. If you find that your germander is creeping out of control, simply divide it as you would perennials in your garden. Creeping germander is evergreen, but can easily be divided in early spring, just as it's beginning to take off with new growth. It's so versatile, it can be planted in low beds in the very front, accentuating taller plants in the back. Overhanging the wall of a taller bed, accentuating the architecture of the bed, or allowed to creep amongst paving stones, enhancing the look of the paths, softening those rough edges, and making them much more inviting. For best floral performance and to keep from getting too leggy, give your creeping germander a good shearing in mid to late spring. It's cold tolerant all the way down to zone 5, so there'll be no need to protect this plant from potentially frosty winter nights. In warmer winters, creeping germander will perk up and begin to flower very early and will keep right on blooming right through the fall. If you had trouble with artemisia rotting in your garden, give creeping germander a try instead. The foliage color is similar and the delicate flowers may make this plant a better choice for your yard. Our question this week is about installing new vegetable beds and how to best water them. I get lots of questions on this one, unfortunately, usually after some damage has occurred. Many people choose to build raised beds for vegetables and purchase topsoil organic mixes to fill the entire bed. While there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, especially if you have very heavy clay soil or non-existent rocky soil, there are a few key adjustments to be made right from the start. When you purchase soil mixes, they're likely almost completely dry, so when you fill your bed with them, they'll have no capacity to hold water until you mix them. This will normally take several days, adding water then adding water and mixing again until the soil is uniformly moist. It's not a bad thing to have lots of organic matter in this mix, but once organic matter becomes completely dry, it's very difficult to get it moistened again. So a big mistake that many gardeners make is building the bed and planting right away, then starting a watering regime. If that's the case, most of the water added to the soil will drain right through in little rivulets, providing almost no moisture to your new little seedlings. And with very little root mass, seedlings can't stay dry for too long. So this combination sets up a situation of almost certain failure, leading many people to wonder just what exactly is going on. Very few people will have any clue of the simple nature of the problem, and their minds will jump immediately to the worst-case scenario: terrible hordes of invisible insects, or horror of horrors, a soil-borne disease. But those are not usually the case, so if you've had this trouble, go out and dig around in your garden bed. If there are pockets of dusty soil, do some mixing and try again. In your garden this week, it's time to plant chard, carrot, mustard, and turnip greens. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit us at klru.org/ctg with your questions and plants from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with John Dromgoole.
Hello gardening friends, welcome to Backyard Basics. Let's talk a little bit about bulbs, the kind you can force and the kind that will make wonderful Christmas presents, and you can do a whole bunch of them. You got to start them about 3, maybe 4 weeks before the time you're going to give them. So we're going to talk about paper whites. There's several kinds, there are many kinds as a matter of fact. I've picked a couple of them today. This is a nice white one that we're going to use. And what you're going to do is, you store them in paper. That's important. If you're not ready to plant them, don't put them in plastic, put them in paper on top of the refrigerator, and they won't go bad on you that way. You can store them for several weeks. So when we get these bulbs, you're looking for a nice healthy one. We're looking for one that doesn't have any soft spots on it. Everything seems to be intact. So in soil, we need a well-draining soil. That's very important. And we'll put them into the pot. There's the soil right there. We're setting them down, and this pot will hold about 3. 3 is a nice number also for growing out and looking very good. So there you have it. This is a white one. It's a beautiful little flower, and it's a very simple white one and very fragrant too. And that's one of the nice things about this type is they're very, very fragrant. It takes about 2 maybe to 3 weeks to get them up to speed where they're really looking nice. One of the main things is don't plant them too deep. So I'm just gently putting some soil around them. We're going to see that these continue to stick up a bit. Got to get them in there a little firm. One more handful of soil. There you go. See the bulb sticking out a little bit? We want that neck sticking up there, but not so high. There we go, that looks good. They're going to be beautiful. They're going to get about 12 inches tall. Pretty pot, really neat. Or you can get a clay pot and wrap them for Christmas, put a nice foil and a ribbon on them. So there they are, we've got them in. We want to go ahead and water them in just a little bit. There we go, that'll just settle them down. That'll take the air away from them. And that's about it. We don't have to overwater them during this process. So maybe 2, if we're lucky, 3 weeks from now. What we'll do is put them in a cool spot for a while, maybe a nice 60 degree. So around here during this period, you've got to put them in a little bit of a shady spot so they stay nice and cool. And there you have it. They're going to grow really neat. You don't have to add any fertilizer. You have to have a good potting soil that drains well and a pot that drains well too. Sometimes we put a little bit of gravel in the bottom of the pot just to improve the drainage. So there we have the inland growing in soil, and it's going to be a wonderful present. Even if it's not quite in bloom yet, it's going to bloom, and the blooms last for several weeks. I mean, that's the beauty of these. You're going to get a long period of blooms. Now, here we go into some water. Now, what we'll do is, I've got some granite here. Granite works very well, it drains very well, and so I'm going to put that in here. Now this one we don't bury, and this one is a beautiful one called Grand Soleil d'Or. And so they're going to be spaced in there the same way. But in this case, and once again you're checking for any soft spots, we're not going to go much deeper than that. If we put them in deeper into the soil, they're going to go ahead and rot down there for us. So 3 of these, once again, fit in the pot very, very nicely. We don't have to do much more than sit them in there, although I might put a little bit more soil around them, granite around them, and then there we have it. We fill this with water, and then we go right up to the bottom of this. We need to maintain that water, and we have another wonderful gift for you to give to your friends during the season. These are going to be a nice golden color, and you're going to be very, very happy with this type of a gift. For Backyard Basics, I'm John Dromgoole. I'll see you next time.
Find out more at klru.org/CTG and check us out on Facebook. Next week, take a look at small space design with upcycled ideas. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online and follow CTG's blog. Check out klru.org/CTG.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.